Hey all, your OS reviews. In this video, we're doing a quick comparison evaluating the main differences between the Boox Palma 2, the Palma 1, as well as the original Bigme Hibreak, the non-pro edition. Now, all three of these devices are compact ebook readers, can be thought of as a pocket-sized Kindle device, primarily designed for reading with their beautiful e-ink displays, which are transflective, and as a result, if you're using them in direct sunlight, the brighter that it gets around you, it's actually easier to make out, similar to a piece of paper, compared to on a regular LCD or OLED screen, which would wash out significantly more under similar conditions, and you have to crank the brightness all the way up. It might drain more power compared to an e-ink display. All three of these devices, though, do have a front light that you can activate, aka glow light, which is convenient if you're using them in bed at night, for example, and still want to make it out, with fairly consistent lighting. Now, if we dim all of the external lights around us, we can see that, interestingly enough, the Palma 1 here in the middle actually seems to be the brightest in terms of the front light, at least within the sample devices that we have in front of us for testing, compared to the Palma 2 and the Bigme Hibreak are, I would say, roughly even when it comes to maximum brightness from there. One other notable difference, though, is the Palma 1 and 2 also have adjustable color temperature, so you are able to make these displays, in terms of the front light, more warm feeling, as you can tell here, yellowish, versus more of a bluish, colder color temperature based on your preferences. And that adjustable color temperature is missing on the original Bigme Hibreak. It only comes to this one default colder color temperature. There is no warmer adjustment, which is a feature that they introduced in the Hibreak Pro, their newest revision. However, at north of $450, the Hibreak Pro is also head and shoulders more expensive compared to all three of these devices, which are sitting in the roughly $200 price range instead. Which is also why I think this is a more apt comparison, since these three are much closer in terms of price point. Otherwise, they're all running on a version of Android, so it's going to be a bit more flexible compared to a true Kindle device, which has more of a locked-down operating system, and as a result, all three have access to the Google Play Store, allowing you to download additional third-party apps, including the aforementioned Kindle for reading, Webtoon, even other social media apps and reading apps as well, can all be leveraged. In terms of form factor, the Bigme Hibreak is the most compact, featuring a 5.8-inch display compared to the 6.1-inch panel found on the Palma 2 and Palma 1. These are essentially identical, and all three have a roughly 300 ppi resolution, so on paper, sharpness should be more or less the same. That is to say, for general reading purposes, all three actually look pretty clear and crisp when it comes to reading back text details. That being said, the Bigme Hibreak comes in two configurations, one which is the black and white version that we have in front of us here, that's going to be, again, closer in profile to the Palma 1 and 2, which only have a black and white option, but it also has a optional color e-ink version using Kaleido 3 that you can pick if you are trying to read back more comics, look at more images, and you want some added color. If so, then having that configuration will be unique to the Bigme at this point in time, so it would be nice if Boox offered a optional color version for folks wanting it, maybe down the road. But generally speaking, the black and white version of the e-ink panel is supposedly a little bit better in terms of contrast. Here's one example of a color e-ink screen from Bigme, where you can tell how the white here might seem a little bit more grayish as a result of the Kaleido 3 display stack, compared to just regular black and white, has more of a pure white appearance, which we can see a bit more clearly here side by side. So if you're only using it for reading back text details, then having a black and white model might actually be advantageous from the perspective of contrast. So you can pick and choose, but again with Palma, there is only this black and white version. Again, as for footprint, the Hibreak is going to be the more compact device, though, with a slightly smaller screen. It might be a little bit more comfortable to hold if you have slightly smaller hands, although the thickness is roughly the same. And both panels have the same 2:1 aspect ratio like modern smartphones, just being a bit more tall compared to the 16:9 of most Kindles and e-note devices. Also, design-wise, with the Palma, you can choose between a black frame version or a white version that we have in front of us, so the color of the bezel is also customizable. Otherwise, when it comes to build quality, I would say it's pretty much even across all three devices. They're built out of polycarbonate plastic, including the frame, as well as the back here for the Boox, having kind of a paper-like texture, which is going to offer a little bit more traction and grip. And similarly, with the Bigme Hibreak, we also have another kind of plastic polycarbonate frame with almost a synthetic leather finish going on with the back, offering similar levels of grip as well. So the fit and finish is honestly pretty much par on par across all three units here. One quick point is the Bigme Hibreak's camera maybe wobbles just a little bit more on a table if you are tapping on it compared to the Palmas are completely flat. Inside, though, we'll find some more differences, including the Palma 2 having the fastest processor out of the trio. It's the Qualcomm Snapdragon 750G octa-core. This is a 8nm chip, compared to the Palma 1 was using the Snapdragon 662 that was a 11nm architecture, versus the Bigme has technically the slowest processor out of the trio. It is a MediaTek Helio P35 based on a 12nm fabrication process. And although synthetic benchmarks don't always correlate one-to-one with real-world performance, just as reference, the 750G here scores close to 400,000 on Antutu benchmarks, compared to the 662 is closer to 250,000, aka a rough 60% reduction from those synthetic benchmarks, and the MediaTek Helio P35 scores close to 150,000 on Antutu. So if we were to believe the specs alone, the Palma 2 should be 2 times more performant than the Bigme Hibreak, especially when it comes to the GPU performance. It's actually already twice as fast as the Palma 1. But here's the thing, in real-world performance, it actually doesn't feel like that much of a gap between these three devices, and I think it's because the biggest bottleneck here is still with the refresh rate of the e-ink screen being a little bit more choppy compared to a faster 90 or 120 that you'll find on a LCD or OLED panel. If you're only using this for reading back documents that are not very resource intensive, you may not feel that big of a difference at all among these three devices, even though the benchmarks might say otherwise, and perhaps if they were regular smartphones, you would feel the difference more. And what is a bit more noticeable is this 8nm chipset being more efficient compared to the 11 and 12nm on these two devices. With a smaller transistor size, I found that the battery life performance on the Palma 2 tended to be at least an hour, if not 3 hours longer compared to these two other devices. So keep that in mind. Plus, it tended to be more thermally efficient as well. So when I was charging it up or pressing it with harder tasks, the Palma 2 consistently got cooler during usage compared to these two devices, which got a little bit more warm, especially when you're charging them, a bit more toasty towards the top regions. So that added efficiency might be the one biggest benefit of having the upgraded processor. Additionally, with battery size, you can expect roughly 4,000 milliamp hours on both of the Palma devices versus 3,300 milliamp hours on the Hibreak, so just a little bit smaller there. However, the Hibreak has one big advantage, which is it's capable of supporting 4G LTE SIM cards. For example, we'll work with T-Mobile here in the US. You can actually replace a smartphone with something like this to make calls as a minimalist device, a light phone alternative, versus the Palma versions do not have a cellular modem built on in, so they are Wi-Fi only at this point in time. Of course, with the Bigme, you could always use it in the airplane mode or turn off that cellular radio completely, so I think it's always nice to have the versatility of being able to use it as a phone if needed. All three devices, though, do have a micro SD card slot that you can use to expand on the 128GB of built-in storage, which is equivalent on all three, along with 6GB of RAM is also the same across all three of these devices. Some final hardware differences include the Palma 2 being the only one out of the trio to have a fingerprint scanner integrated into the power key. It makes it a little bit better in terms of biometric authentication. You can unlock it with a single tap compared to the Palma 1 and the original Bigme Hibreak don't have a fingerprint unlock. However, you can use a password or PIN instead. And the last notable hardware difference would be with the cameras. I don't think this is a super critical feature on a e-reader at the end of the day, but the Bigme has a 13-megapixel autofocus lens on the rear compared to the Palmas both have a 16-megapixel lens. A little bit sharper there. However, the Hibreak does have a front-facing 5-megapixel camera for video conferencing purposes, which is missing on both of the Palma models. There is no front-facing lens. Also, all three of these units are missing a 3.5mm headphone jack, so you have to use the built-in single speaker on all three or opt for wireless Bluetooth headphones instead. When it comes to the software experience, all three are, again, based on Android, so visually they're quite similar. There is no universal app tray on all three, so similar to on an iPhone, you get unlimited pages to decorate with additional applications as you install them. However, you can always use a third-party launcher, like Nova Launcher, for example, if you wanted to change that yourself. Notably, when it comes to software features, I would say the Hibreak as well as the Palma 2 are the closest when it comes to being a bit more fully packed. For instance, with the Palma 2, based on Android 13, Boox have given us an AI assistant that is pretty well integrated within the entire UI. Functionality is similar to just a regular ChatGPT app, so you could always just go to the Google Play Store and download ChatGPT, Gemini, DeepSeek yourself. But the part that makes this integration a little bit smarter is you can also use it as a floating window when you are reading back books. Case in point, just tap on AI Assistant, and it will now show up as a floating window that we can flexibly rearrange, ask questions, even copy and paste text between documents and also the AI for better prompting. Likewise, on the Bigme Hibreak, there is a official Bigme GPT app built in as well, also leveraging the LLM models from ChatGPT, and you can also, with this particular app, create some images as well to use maybe as the background wallpaper. So there's two modes of thought. On one hand, maybe the whole AI bubble is a little overhyped, and like I said, if you wanted to leverage these features, there was nothing stopping you from just going to the store and downloading your own, even though it is technically missing on the Palma 1's software experience by default. But on the other hand, I don't think it's a bad idea to have a basic AI assistant on a e-reader like this, because it's more designed for reading and productivity. So as you're asking questions and reading them back, the replies, it just feels a little bit more comfortable on a e-ink panel. Likewise, both the Palma 2 software as well as the Bigme Hibreak give you access to a camera app directly, so you can use this to just snap general images, access HDR, even record some quick video clips, and even though the screens on these devices are black and white, in this case, if you are viewing back those images and files on a computer, it will still be in full color. Compared to on the Palma 1, interestingly enough, you could only access the camera through the document scanning app. There was no official camera app for recording video or changing any of the other settings. So I guess in terms of flexibility, again, that is slightly better on the software experiences of these two. One other difference with the built-in utility tools would be the voice recorder. So we can find these functions present on all three devices, tapping on the recorder tool here. But this is one aspect where Bigme actually has a slight advantage, because their recorder actually enables voice-to-text transcription. So as it's being captured through the microphone, it will try to convert it into text for you to read back, edit, and also summarize using, again, the built-in large language model. Compared to on the Boox, it's a simple voice recorder or sound recorder with no additional AI overlay at this point in time. Again, there's nothing stopping you from going to the Play Store and downloading a third-party, maybe voice recorder app yourself, which is more intelligent, but that is one difference I observed using just the first-party pre-installed apps. Gestures for navigating around the UI are also roughly consistent. So on the Bigme, you can swipe here on the left edge and it'll pull up a partial bar of just icons for triggering shortcuts, including turning on wireless, as well as accessing the screen brightness controls, versus on the Palma, it takes up a larger full screen view, but also labels it with the name underneath that might be a little easier to understand. So slightly different way of displaying that, but the functionality is quite similar. We can also swipe over on the left-hand corner here to pull up the multitasking view on all three devices, which honestly isn't that dissimilar, jumping back and forth between currently open apps. And we can swipe in the middle there to close back into the main homepage, similar across all three devices. And all three devices also feature a remappable hardware key on the left edge, found on both the Hibreak as well as the Palma devices. So you're able to assign different commands using the settings within the software, for example, tapping on it once to refresh the page, maybe double-clicking or long pressing to trigger a different app to open automatically. It's pretty convenient. Plus, on all three devices, you're able to use the volume rocker to act as page turn controls when you are in the reading app. So again, general interaction is pretty similar across these three devices. And again, the reading app as well, I would say, has a pretty similar layout, all things considered. We're able to long hold as well on certain words that we're unfamiliar with, to annotate, look up the dictionary definition, search up Wikipedia. Also, on all three devices, I have received a couple of firmware updates since using them as well that improves on the stability, as well as providing some security patches, although OS level upgrades are more scarce when it comes to these e-ink manufacturers. So from a reliability point of view, I wouldn't say I've had a significantly better or worse experience across the Bigme Hibreak versus the Palma devices. They all feel roughly in line with one another. Primarily when it comes to just general reading and web browsing, they both seem to work well for the most part. Again, since there is no note-taking aspect to really worry about, they don't really recognize any active pressure-sensitive stylus pen on any of these three devices, so functionality like pressure sensitivity, palm rejection aren't really at play here, and so they were all relatively simple and straightforward to use. So that is more or less it as far as our quick hands-on comparison between, again, the Palma 2, Palma 1, and the Bigme Hibreak. Again, when it comes to pocket-sized e-reader devices, I would say they're roughly par and par. All of these displays come from a similar generation of manufacturing, can be refreshed up to a faster 30 frames per second if you are scrolling through web pages, for example, so faster compared to older generations of e-ink screens, even though it isn't as fast as on LCD or OLED panels. And all of these have a slight gap between the glass digitizer and the screen e-ink underneath to accommodate that front light that needs to be sandwiched in between the manufacturing stack. So when it comes down to it, I would say it just is a matter of preference if you want something that's a little bit more compact, but if you're okay with giving up the adjustable color temperature that the Hibreak here does not have. On the other hand, the Bigme device does have an optional color e-ink version if you are looking for that, as well as having the built-in cellular radio modem is going to be a nice touch that is missing on the Palma devices. However, if you're okay with already carrying around a regular smartphone or cell phone anyways, maybe it's not something that's a deal breaker for you, in which case the Palma 2, again having technically the fastest hardware inside, might be more future-proof, better thermal efficiency, the longest battery performance out of the trio in my testing, as well as having that fingerprint scanner are all nice attributes to have. So you can't really go wrong with any of these three options, I'd say, if you just want a compact size e-reader, mainly some minor differences along the way. So you can check out more details as well as our original in-depth review of all three of these devices on our channel if you are interested, but for now that's been our video. Hopefully this was helpful in just clarifying some of those high-level differences. Thanks for watching here at OS Reviews of the comparison between the first, second generation Palma and the original Bigme Hibreak.